One of the things that I love about this paper, there are many things I love about this paper, but so this was a paper where I would have lots of questions and you always answered it. So, initially one of my, and that's really rare. It's a paper that I had a conversation with. So, one of the questions that I've been really thinking is like, okay, so is intersectional joy orthogonal to, intersectional stress or distress? Y'all answered the question of that on page 61. You say, these are unique expressions of joy or what is freshly generated by existing at a particular intersectional position, not in response to harm, but perhaps despite it or even completely independent from it. Tell me, tell me about that sentence. And if y'all like me, y'all wrote something and you're like, I wrote that. So that's on page 61. But tell me about how y'all talked through whether this would be independent, if it's, like you said it, Fatima, you alluded to it, not necessarily a response to harm. I'd like to hear y'all tell me about that process when you were writing this. Y'all want me to read it again? Because it is
No, I remember
beautiful.
the sentence. I remember writing the sentence actually, and
Elle, can you come a little closer? I'm having a little hard time hearing you. You're not as clear as I'd like you to be.
oh, I know what's happening actually. I will come closer. Then when Fatima talks, I will adjust to make the audio even better.
Okay.
Um, but I I remember when I wrote that. And the reason why I don't think it. So I'm a quantitative scientist. I was trained in quantitative sciences and I've grown into being more than that. And independence means, in the quantitative ways, like, or orthogonal means they can't coexist. And that's completely at odds with intersectionality. But what I'm saying is that it seems antithetical to be joyous in the middle of pain, but you can be. And that's why, and so it can be independent and co-located. Like it could be co-experienced at the same time. And that might, because it could be unrelated. Like I could be in the midst of, I am in the midst of going through having my healthcare eliminated at a structural level and the stress of that. But I'm also going and spending time with Black queer femmes and having unique experiences that only we can share. And so that joy, that pain is bringing us together. But because we're Black queer femmes, and not just because we're Black queers in pain, we're living that pain at the same time. But because of that unique experience that we're sharing, we're creating this joy together. And you know, and it sounds like a circular argument, but you also intrinsically know it. Like how many times are you dealing with your grandmother who's saying something awful and disrespectful, but the way she says it and the way she holds you in her bosom when she says it, or the fact that you can smell her cooking and it brings you back to a place, it brings you so much joy. Like those are the same things. And it's an intersectional identity because you might have grown up in poverty, or she works the way she is, or that pain or the way she interacts with you is because of how she was reared, but it's joyous. Like my grandmother said some of the most transphobic things I could think of, but I was one of the few grandkids she let be in the kitchen with her.
Get it. I get it. This also really sort of sits with intersectionality's that other tenet about complexity, right? Because intersectionality is not just about, the marginalization and the oppression. Yeah, that's really core, but it's also about how people can be simultaneously privileged and oppressed. How people can be oppressor and oppressed. That really sort of complex interplay is at the heart of intersectionality. And so it makes sense or it makes sense to me, this concept about intersectional joy in the midst of pain. Fatima, what say you about the same thing?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I think, Elle has another piece around resilience and how that,
Oh, resilient. I didn't even mention that one. Resilience is not an adverse event. I'll
right,
drop that in
right.
the chat.
And so I think that that's really important for thinking through this passage, because I think what we were trying to also get at is, there's so much, people will see oppressed people going about their lives, dancing, smiling, cooking, eating, having lives, having families and friends, and be like, wow, they are so resilient in the face of this oppression, right? Is this a is this like a learned behavior to push back against oppression, right? I think that's what's underlying the way that folks talk about it. And I think what we're trying to get at here is that, like, yes, sometimes you do things as to adapt towards oppression or to, you know, mitigate it, but sometimes you do things just because they're fun, right? Sometimes you do things just because it's beautiful. Sometimes you do things just because it feels good, right? And the second you lose sight of that, you flatten, like, if there is one Black experience, which there's not, right, you flatten it further, right? Like you flatten all of the ways that people move through the world, all the ways that people deal with oppression and joy and opportunity, right? And so for us, I think it was really important to hold that not everything is in response to these oppressive structures. Some things are simply because they feel good, and it's important to hold on to feeling good.
Yeah, and before we pitch to move along, I want to not excuse, but say I'm using a lot of examples because this is the thing that I'm still wrestling with, how to define it. It should, like, what I don't want is to see a bunch of measures and papers come out on measure intersectional joy, and then doctors trying to find a way to facilitate that, and it becomes the new resilience where if you could just be more joyous, you'll be healthy. Like I'm not interested in that. I mean, I'm sure it's gonna happen. You won't be by me, but that is just not. That's not like. I think I want to identify it and get out of the way of it. Like I want uh intersectional joy. Like I think if I were to think of a grant, the grant would be giving people the resources to do it themselves, and the deliverable will be did it work, and that would just be it. Like that's what I because I feel like there's it's kind of like ephemeral. It's like I don't know if it can be contained, and if I want to try to contain it or measure it, and I feel like observing it too closely could harm it. But when I think about it, I think I use it in my mind to explain how to explain the joy that people whose lives are considered to be worthless experience. Like when I see somebody who is unhoused and people who are assuming that they use drugs, and I see them, and sometimes things are just bad, right? But there are moments of joy for them, and they don't make sense to us, but I think that those moments are worthwhile. And so the idea that those lives are meaningless or that they should be diminished or like aren't worth living. I'm going back to a quote where I've heard people say some pretty awful things about people who use drugs and essentially discredit the purpose of their lives in general. And I'm like, but there's joy in that life for them.